Chapter 11. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Recording opportunity. Translator. Atlas Studios editor. Atlas Studios. When he walked out of his residence, he saw that the sky was cloudless and the ground was dry. It did not appear that a rainstorm had visited before. Shenran was puzzled. I wonder what happened last night, with the storm and the sudden 100-fold richer spiritual energy. Hey! Brother, there was a rainstorm last night. How was your harvest? The red-faced old Su walked over from afar, showing his yellow teeth and looking extremely happy. Before Shenran could speak, he continued, last night, blessings fell from the sky. I actually successfully broke through the realm that I hadn't broken through in many years. From the 5th level of Qi refinement to the 6th level of Qi refinement. Hehe, if I'm able to drift along. Ahem, I can live freely for a few more years. What about you? Was the rain last night blessings from the heavens? Just in time. It helped a lot. Faced with old Su's question, Shenran smiled faintly. My gains are not bad. I also managed to break through some realms. Yes. Old Su nodded repeatedly. Those disciples who left the sect would probably be angered to death if they knew that they had missed such a huge opportunity. Ha. Let's not talk about it anymore. Go and do your work first. I have to go and catch up on my sleep. After saying that, old Su, who had entered the room, said angrily, Damn, what did you do last night? Did you tear down the house? Fortunately, my bed wasn't affected. Sleep. As soon as he finished speaking, old Su's thunderous snores sounded from inside the door again. Thinking of the bed that had collapsed and the pit he had created, Shenran felt helpless. However, it was a new day and, as a servant disciple, the most important thing for him was to receive his own servant mission as soon as possible. He would repair the bed in his residence later that night. Shenran went all the way to the servant quarters to receive the mission. He specially chose a mission to guard the mountain gate and record the entry and exit of the disciples of the Empyrean Sword sect. Usually, most servant disciples were unwilling to accept this mission. After all, although the other missions were a little tiring, they would have more time to cultivate if they could complete them earlier. As for the mission to guard the mountain gate, they would have to stay at the mountain gate until night time. However, Shenran was more than happy to accept this mission. The mountain gate was the place with the highest traffic, where the disciples of the Empyrean Sword sect came and went. In a day, he would probably come into contact with thousands of disciples. To others, this would be of no use at all. But don't forget, Shenran could check other people's narratives. After checking the narrative of that ordinary disciple yesterday, he spent 10 spirit stones to buy a supreme-grade spirit gathering pill. So, Shenran thought of a bright future where he could get his cultivation resources without paying much. That was to snatch all the unexpected opportunities that originally belonged to others, without them knowing. As expected. In a day, Shenran recorded more than 1,000 disciples of the Empyrean Sword sect who had just entered the sect. He secretly memorized the narratives of many of these disciples. This is an ordinary disciple of the Empyrean Sword sect. His talent is ordinary. If nothing goes wrong, he will stay at the Empyrean Sword sect and live an ordinary life. However, on May 13, 3074, he accidentally falls into the Ghost Cry Cliff in the Grand Myriad Mountains. At the bottom of the cliff, he accepts the ancient mighty Azure Supreme Darch inheritance. From then on, he achieves amazing cultivation results and becomes a famous expert. This is a core disciple of the Empyrean Sword sect. His talent is ordinary, but he discovers a spiritual field that can grow high-grade spiritual herbs in a short period of time. From then on, he's accepted as a final disciple by the sect elders. He doesn't know that there is a 10,000-year-old wood spirit marrow filled with spiritual energy under his spiritual field. By absorbing it, he can obtain a wood spirit body. This is an ordinary disciple of the Empyrean sword sect. His talent is not bad. If nothing goes wrong, he will become a core disciple of the Empyrean sword sect. On the 9th day of the first month of the year 3074, when he's traveling at the foot of the mountain, he saves a beggar in Qingshan town. That beggar is actually one of the experts in the world who likes to travel in the mortal world. This disciple obtains the blessing of the expert and his cultivation talent permanently increases by 3 times. In the end, he becomes a strong competitor of the Empyrean sword sect's Dao seed. As soon as Shenran saw the narratives of these 3 people, he knew that as long as he obtained any one of the opportunities, he would benefit a lot. Unfortunately, he could only obtain the first 2 of the 3 opportunities. The third opportunity could only be obtained by leaving the Empyrean sword sect and heading to Qingshan town at the foot of the mountain. However, only ordinary disciples and core disciples could enter and get out of the gate at will. If the servant disciples wanted to get out of the gate, it must be for some important matter. Otherwise, there was only one choice. That was to withdraw from the Empyrean sword sect. This troubled Shenran. If he left the sect, he would obtain a blessing that could increase his cultivation talent. However, this also meant that it would be very difficult for him to come into contact with the disciples of the cultivation sect in the future. He had only come into contact with 1,000 disciples today, but he had already obtained information of 3 top-notch opportunities. There were still thousands of people left untouched. Who knew if there would be more top-notch opportunities? After consideration, Shenran decided to give up on the blessing opportunity at the foot of the mountain. On the way back to the dormitory area of the servant disciples, Shenran looked at the narratives of the servant disciples beside him. This is a servant disciple of the Empyrean sword sect. If nothing goes wrong, he will live an ordinary life. Servant disciple, leading an ordinary life. Servant disciple. Nothing special, as expected, as a servant disciple. If he didn't have the ability to modify narratives like Shenran, his future would not be great. Shenran was disappointed and was about to look away when he was suddenly attracted by the narrative of one of the servant disciples. This is a servant disciple of the Empyrean sword sect. On the 8th day of the first month of the year 3074, when he's fetching water in the back mountain, he accidentally saves the seriously injured 8th peak elder and becomes an ordinary disciple of the 8th peak of the Empyrean sword sect. Then he lives an ordinary life. Compared to the 3 disciples that Shenran had seen during the day, the future opportunities of this servant disciple were not worth mentioning. However, Shenran wanted to break away from being a servant disciple to become an ordinary disciple. This servant disciple brother, thank you for bringing me this good news. Anyway, after you become an ordinary disciple, you're still ordinary. Then, give me the opportunity. Shenran's eyes lit up as he stared at the servant disciple's ignorant back and silently thanked him. When he returned to his residence, old Su was nowhere to be seen. He was probably looking for someone to drink with. However, to Shenran's surprise, the bed that had collapsed last night was repaired. This old Su seems to be playful, but I didn't expect him to be so nice. This was the first time he felt the kindness of others after being demoted to a servant disciple. Shenran's heart warmed. Then Shenran did not cultivate as usual. He was preparing to go out and retrieve the Azure Supreme the Arch Inheritance in the Grand Myriad Mountains. At this moment, a beautiful figure with the unique fragrance of a young girl appeared at his door. Chapter 12. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Wan Ling's Persuasion. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios. A beautiful girl in green clothes and lanky legs was smiling at Shenran with her big black eyes. Ran, it has been a long time. She was Wan Qingqing, the chief disciple of the 9th Summit, the only daughter of Peak Master Wan Xiling. She grew up in the Empyrean sword sect with Shenran and had a deep relationship with him. However, after Wan Qingqing became the chief disciple of the 9th Summit, the two gradually did not keep in touch. Even though Shenran had transmigrated and this was the first time he had seen Wan Qingqing, he had inherited memories of her. He had a good impression of her. Looking at the girl's starry eyes, Shen Ran subconsciously blurted out, "It has been a long time." Wan Qingqing was smiling. Her big eyes were curved into beautiful crescents, and she looked rather cute. However, when Wan Qingqing thought of the reason why Shen Ran was demoted to a servant disciple, her eyes dimmed. "After learning that you've been demoted to a servant disciple, I've been wanting to see you. Unfortunately, I'm usually busy, and I only found the opportunity now." He looked at Wan Qingqing's green robe that ordinary disciples wore. Comparing it to his servant disciple's black robe, Shen Ran smiled and said, "You're the chief disciple of the 9th summit, so you must be a little busy. It must be hard for you to make time to visit me, a servant disciple." "Huh, you're the chief disciple. Aren't you afraid that others will laugh at you for coming to see me at night?" When Shen Ran spoke, he was smiling and was obviously joking. When she heard Shen Ran's words, she had mixed feelings and was filled with guilt. "Ran, don't be discouraged. Actually, your aptitude isn't that bad. Even if you're a servant disciple for the time being, as long as you don't dull your aspiration but cultivate diligently, you can still become an ordinary disciple in the future. Of course. My fate is in my hands, not the heavens. In the future, I will definitely be able to achieve the path that belongs to me." Ha ha ha. On the surface, Shen Ran seemed to be joking. But he was practically telling the truth. There were supreme bones, Panga's sacred body, ancient immortal eyes, heavenly spirit root, and various other top-notch talents, gathered into an integral whole. In the future, as long as nothing unexpected happened, he would definitely become a person who could rule the ages. He would sweep across all enemies from the present to the future and kill until no one in the world dared to proclaim Lord. Even without talking about the future, the current him could crush ordinary peak Divine Sea experts with just the 3rd level of the Divine Sea realm. How could he be in a desolate frame of mind? Seeing that Shen Ran had not become disheartened and depressed after being demoted to a servant disciple, Wan Qingqing heaved a sigh of relief. She secretly decided that as long as she found an opportunity, she would definitely help Shen Ran become an ordinary disciple again. The girl let go of the knot in her heart and felt her mood lift. They chatted on and on about their childhood. Shen Ran was also humorous and amused Wan Qingqing. Late at night, Wan Qingqing reluctantly bid farewell to her childhood friend. "I'll go back first. Work hard and cultivate. I'll come and see you in a few days." As she spoke, she handed over a bottle of the lowest grade essence cultivation pill. This essence cultivation pill was a drop in the bucket compared to the opportunity Shen Ran was about to obtain. But it was still a girl's kindness. Shen Ran took it with a smile and decided to repay her 10,000 times in the future. Not for this bottle of essence cultivation pills, but for this rare warm kindness in the cold fantasy world. Humph! Not long after Wan Qingqing left, a cold snort suddenly sounded. Shen Ran, who had just put away the essence cultivation pill, suddenly felt a blast of intense hostility targeting him. Instantly, his hair stood on end and all his muscles tensed. His calm divine sea surged, and countless golden spiritual chi poured into his meridians. Shen Ran had already entered a prepared state, ready to strike at any time. Wang Qingxian. Has he already found out that I killed his 2 sidekicks? No, this hostility is not particularly strong. It does not seem like Wang Qingxian. Countless thoughts came to his mind. Shen Ran did not immediately choose to attack the source of the hostility. He shouted coldly, "Who is it?" The hostility that was targeted at him ebbed like a receding tide. It was replaced by a plaintive sigh. "I. You're young and not talented, but you're ambitious. This won't do. Don't you understand the principle of being too rigid and easy to break?" Shen Ran. As she spoke, a graceful and beautiful woman in her 30s walked in. This beautiful woman's eyebrows were 70.8% similar to Wan Qingqing's, but her temperament was mature, her figure was plump, and her figure was curvaceous. Peak Master. Shen Ran recognized the newcomer and was instantly speechless. She was Wan Qingqing's mother, Wan Xiling. You've been intimate with Qingqing since you were young. It can be said that I watched you grow up. It doesn't matter if you were a little naughty when you were young, but at your age now, you should understand that some things can be done, but some things cannot be done. In contrast to Wan Qingqing, Wan Xiling looked at Shen Ran coldly. Here, I'll advise you as an elder. There's nothing you can do about poor talent, but what a person does can be decided by him. At the same time, you have to understand that if you do something wrong, the consequences are unavoidable. Wan Xiling said coldly. Seeing that the other party did not come with good intentions and was even implying something, Shen Ran could not be enthusiastic either. He asked expressionlessly, Peak Master Wan, what do you want to say? Why don't you be more direct? Alright, I won't hide it anymore. Didn't you offend the Dao seed, Wang Qingxian, that day? Shen Ran did not expect to hear the name of the spy from the demon sect here. He raised his eyebrows. Yes. Wan Xiling seemed a little anxious. You don't know that Wang Qingxian is famous for seeking revenge for the smallest grievance. Whoever offends him will definitely suffer his revenge later on. In the past 2 days, dozens of cultivators have already lost their lives because they offended him in the Grand Myriad Mountains. He won't even let off our fellow disciples from the Empyrean Sword sect. I can't believe there's such a thing. Shen Ran was stunned. However, he knew in his heart that those people who had been attacked by Wang Qingxian had probably not really offended him. Instead, they were suspected of being the killer who had killed his 2 sidekicks that day. As the person involved, he knew very well that those people had never interacted with Wang Qingxian. Is it because he's suspicious and worried that he himself will be exposed, so he killed them? Wang Qingxian is indeed a spy from the demon sect. He is really ruthless. Wang Qingxian is the Dao seed of the Empyrean Divine Palace. As a servant disciple, you have offended him before. I don't think he will specially come to find trouble with you. However, if he sees you together with Qingqing one day, Wang Qingxian might hate us mother and daughter, and the 9th summit. Therefore, if there's no necessity to meet, you should stay away from Qingqing. Wan Xiling looked worried. Shen Ran's eyes flickered as he listened to her. Chapter 13. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Rush to the Grand Myriad Mountains. Find the Azure Supreme, the Arch Inheritance. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios. Seeing that Shen Ran did not speak, Wan Xiling continued, that Wang Qingxian broke through to the Illumination realm in just 3 years. He's one of the most powerful candidates for the future Dao child. I've cultivated for many years, but I'm only at the 7th level of the Illumination realm. If he really wants to do something to us and the 9th summit, I can't stop him. Hearing this, coupled with the hostility that was targeted at him previously, Shen Ran's respect for Wan Xiling was gone. Shen Ran, you're just a servant disciple now anyway, and it'll be difficult for you to rise in the future. Why don't you just leave the Empyrean Sword sect? Don't worry, after you leave the mountain, I'll take care of you. It's not difficult to be a rich man for the rest of your life. Wan Xiling continued to persuade him earnestly. Say no more, Peak Master. Shen Ran no longer had a good impression of her and directly interrupted Wan Xiling. I won't give up on the Empyrean Sword sect for the time being. But you don't have to worry. No matter what, I won't let you, Qingqing, and the 9th summit be implicated because of me. Upon hearing Shen Ran's reply, a hint of ruthlessness flashed across Wan Xiling's eyes, but she barely suppressed it. She gritted her teeth and said, all right, since you've made up your mind, I won't say anything else. If you change your mind in the future, you can come to me anytime. However, if we're really implicated by you one day, don't blame me for being ruthless. With that, Wan Xiling left without hesitation. Greetings, Peak Master. Shen Ran remained in the room and heard the other servant disciples greet Wan Xiling. His evaluation of her fell to rock bottom. Did Wan Xiling know that he had offended Wang Qingxian before? Shen Ran recalled the conversation. He suddenly had an annoying guess as to why he would be demoted to a servant disciple. He cared about his friendship with Wan Qingqing. With his full strength, with the supreme bones, Panga's sacred body, ancient immortal eyes, and heavenly spirit root, he was only at the third level of the divine sea realm. But the outcome was still unknown if he were to take on Wan Xiling, who was at the seventh level of the illumination realm. Humph, Shen Ran snorted. What a ruthless woman. Short-sighted and shallow. After he pocketed all the opportunities, he would increase his cultivation. A mere spy from the demon sect, Wang Qingxian, is nothing. He's just a small ant that could be killed with a flip of his hand. Thinking of this, Shen Ran calmed down. Without looking back, he rushed out of his residence and headed straight for the Grand Myriad Mountains. Grand Myriad Mountains. Ghost Cry Cliff. This was a bottomless chasm in the depths of the Grand Myriad Mountains. Standing at the edge of the cliff and looking down at noon, when the sun was at its strongest, he could not see the bottom. At the same time, there was a constant cold wind at the bottom of the cliff and a continuous sound like a resentful ghost crying would arise. Therefore, this natural chasm was also called the Ghost Cry Cliff. Even the bloodthirsty ancient ferocious beasts would usually stay away from this place. Gulp. Shen Ran stood at the edge of the cliff and looked at the dark, deep cliff. He swallowed the spittle in his mouth. I didn't expect such a damn place to hide the inheritance of the ancient powerhouse, the Azure Supreme. If I hadn't seen the narrative, I probably wouldn't have come to this place in my life. Boo-hoo. At this moment, an extremely swift and cold wind blew out from the bottom of the Ghost Cry Cliff. The wind was extremely cold, causing Shen Ran's robes to flutter. At the same time, the wind sounded as though 10,000 babies were wailing at the bottom of the cliff. Even Shen Ran felt his scalp tingle when he heard that. Let's go down. Taking a deep breath, Shen Ran decided not to waste any more time. He immediately climbed down the cliff. As it went deeper, the surrounding temperature began to drop rapidly. It could be seen that the unknown black plants growing on the cliff were covered in frost. However, there were unexpected discoveries. The deeper I go, the higher the concentration of spiritual energy. I've only climbed down for a few hundred feet, but the concentration of spiritual energy is almost 3 times that of the servant quarters. I wonder how dense the spiritual energy will be at the bottom. With this thought in mind, Shen Ran climbed down a little further. The air around him suddenly thickened. He felt as if he had fallen into a bucket of glue that was about to solidify. If he wanted to move his body casually, his limbs felt like they were hung with boundless gravity. Before he could think, another gust of cold wind swept out from the bottom of the Ghost Cry Cliff. Amidst the cries of the 10,000 babies, Shen Ran felt his body suddenly being grabbed by an invisible hand. He was immediately swept down to the bottom of the cliff by a strong force. Damn it! Shen Ran cursed inwardly. He was about to unleash all his strength and spiritual energy to resist. His vision blurred. Whether it was the cold wind or the terrifying cries, they all stopped. The sense of falling ceased to exist. He felt grounded. Shen Ran looked around blankly and realized that he was no longer on some bottomless cliff. Instead, he was unknowingly moved into an extremely vast hall. In the hall, the thick stone pillars, rockery, trees, and the lampstand with candles exuded an ancient and mysterious aura. Everything seemed to have experienced the baptism of endless years, ancient but not ruined. Are we here? The place of the Azure Supreme Thearcha's inheritance. Shen Ran muttered to himself. The Azure Supreme was the strongest person in this fantasy world 30,000 years ago. His rise was the focus of everyone's attention. In just 300 years, he was invincible in the world and defeated the 3,000 extraterrestrial demons. After 100 years of battle with the Outer Realm Demon Master in the void, the Great Tao collapsed. The Azure Supreme alone suppressed the demon master of the outer realm and drove the 3,000 demons who had invaded this world to the outer realm. Only then did he obtain 30,000 years of peace in this fantasy world. However, 5,000 years after the peaceful era began, the Azure Supreme the Arch seemed to have disappeared from the face of the earth. No trace of him could be found. Only countless legends praising the Azure Supreme remained. If one asked who the strongest expert in the history of the human race was, without a doubt, everyone's answer would be the Azure Supreme. It would only be the Azure Supreme. Unexpectedly, his inheritance was left behind at the Ghost Cry Cliff, such a strange and uninhabited cliff. If he had known from elsewhere that this was the place where the Azure Supreme the Arch inheritance was, Shenran would not have believed it. But the source of the news was a narrative. That would definitely not go wrong. This was the legendary place of inheritance of the Azure Supreme. He would obtain the Azure Supreme the Arch inheritance here. Thinking of this, even Shenran, who already had the strongest talent in the world, could not help but feel a little excited. Junior Shenran pays respect to the strongest human in history, the Azure Supreme. As he sighed, Shenran sincerely cupped his fists and bowed to the hall in front of him. Rumble. Before Shenran could finish speaking, the entire hall suddenly began to shake violently. Chapter 14 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Obtaining the Azure Supreme the Arch inheritance. Great freedom. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios, roar. A few huge monsters that were neither human nor beast rushed out of the hall. Their bodies were covered in ferocious bone spikes, and they had green faces and fangs. Looking at the terrifying figures in front of him, Shenran's expression changed. Extraterrestrial. Although Shenran was someone from 30,000 years later, he had never seen with his own eyes what the outer realm demons who had broken through the spatial barrier and invaded this fantasy world 30,000 years ago looked like. However, the novel that described the legendary story of the Azure Supreme 3 years ago also depicted what the outer realm demons looked like. The appearance of the monsters that appeared in front of Shenran at this moment was completely identical to the descriptions in those novels. An indescribable terrifying pressure emanated from the outer realm demons. Shenran was surrounded. For a moment, his muscles tensed up and his hair stood on end. For the first time, he felt a life-and-death crisis. I didn't expect the Azure Supreme Thearka's land of inheritance to be invaded by outer realm demons. No, I can't let these monsters break out of the Ghost Cry Cliff and cause trouble. Shenran's gaze became extremely deep. His eyes widened in anger, and in an instant, golden light spewed out of his eyes. Shenran's clear eyes became like mirrors, slowly breaking apart. Rip. Flirtatious double pupils appeared in his eyes. Ancient immortal eyes, open. The golden light that burst out of his eyes instantly turned into chains that filled the sky, targeting the outer realm demons. Meanwhile, the runes on the more than 300 supreme bones in Shenran's body also began to burn crazily. Endless vigor suddenly rose in his body. A majestic phantom that was filled with endless dominance, sitting on the throne slowly appeared. It reigned in the 9th heavens. Supreme bones, open. This was not all. Infinite power seeped out of his every taut muscle fiber. A Pangu phantom that could effortlessly destroy the world, condensed behind him. Pangu's sacred body, open. The divine sea that stored spiritual energy began to boil. Under the stimulation of the heavenly spirit root, all the golden spiritual energy was mobilized and instantly filled Shenran's meridians. He was ready to unleash his strongest attack. Rumble. Rumble. This was the first time Shenran had used all his trump cards. All the strongest talents in the world were displayed at the same time. Instantly, the surrounding space could not withstand the power emitted by Shenran, causing a continuous shake-up. Everywhere he looked, there were dense spatial cracks. Die! Shenran roared. Compared to the huge outer. Worldly demons, Shenran was only the size of a grain of rice in their eyes. But Shenran remained tenacious and resolute. With the determination to die, he forged ahead to fight them. Boom! All of Shenran's strength was compressed together in an instant before exploding. It smashed fiercely at the outer. Realm demons controlled by the ancient immortal eye. The extremely terrifying power filled the entire palace in an instant. Divine light dazzled, and time and space reversed. Under the immense force, the outer. Realm demons, whose bodies were as large as mountains, kept hissing in pain. However, it was unable to stop their bodies from being gradually bombed into dust by Shenran. The outer. Worldly demons are the mortal enemies of all humans. They must be killed. Shenran's heart froze, and he tightened his grip. The Supreme Phantom and Pangdu Phantom behind him nodded in unison, as if they were very gratified by his performance. Boom! Amidst the explosion, all the outer. Realm demons turned into dust. Grunt, grunt, Shenran, who had landed on the ground, looked exhausted and was panting heavily. All the power and energy was all gone at this moment. Even the pair of ancient immortal eyes became dimmed. He had just given it his best shot. At this moment, the divine sea that stored spiritual energy was already empty. Pa pa pa. A burst of light applause came from an unknown source in the void. A translucent shadow slowly came out from the palace. You are Azure Supreme. Shenran greets Azure Supreme. Shenran had never seen the Azure Supreme before. However, just from the aura emanating from the shadow in front of him, he could determine that the person who had come was the legendary Azure Supreme, celebrated and praised by billions of humans. Only the Azure Supreme could have such a unique temperament. The Azure Supreme shadow nodded slightly, and his majestic voice seemed to ring directly in Shenran's mind. At the end of my life, I made a divination. 30,000 years after I die, a young man with a pure heart will obtain my inheritance. In the face of the outer. Worldly demons charging at you, you did not retreat. Instead, you resolutely waved your fist for the sake of the common people behind you. You are worthy of my inheritance. It's not that no one has come before you, but those people chose to escape when faced with the outer. Realm demons. In the end, they died under the claws of these outer. Realm demons. Actually, if they dared to face them, even if they were weak, they would be safe. It's unfortunate. So those outer. Realm demons were just a test. Only those with both temperament and strength could pass the test. Then, he remembered that Azure Supreme had said that he had been dead for 30,000 years. Shenran was stunned. Azure Supreme, aren't you still standing in front of me? The Azure Supreme shadow shook his head. What you see now is just a projection I left behind. A fragment of consciousness, a thought. I myself have long disappeared from the river of time that cannot be reversed. Actually, after I suppressed the outer. Realm demon master, I was seriously injured. Even the strongest doctor could not save me. However, because I had just ended the war with the outer. Realm demons in the fantasy world at that time, and my vitality had yet to recover, the outer. Realm demons could sweep over at any time. Therefore, I dragged my heavily injured body and endured for 5,000 years. It was only when the human race reappeared with a person who could carry the heavy burden, that I could leave behind this inheritance and leave in peace. Hearing this, Shenran's respect for the Azure Supreme rose to another level. He bowed solemnly. Shenran represents all humans to thank the Azure Supreme for his efforts. The Azure Supreme shadow smiled faintly. Are you willing to accept my inheritance? Without needing to ask, Shenran was naturally willing. Student Shenran greets Master, the Azure Supreme. Seeing Shenran's actions, the Azure Supreme shadow no longer said anything. He reached out and gently tapped the former's forehead. In an instant, Shenran felt a vast amount of cultivation knowledge pouring into his mind. All the information was interwoven, structured, and finally formed a supreme cultivation technique, Ancient 7 Mystic Transformations. Do you know what realm you can reach after cultivating to the limit? The voice of the Azure Supreme posed this question in Shenran's mind. On the path of cultivation, from low to high, it is divided into Qi refinement, divine C, illumination, Marquis, King, and true Emperor. When you cultivate to the extreme, you will become a true Emperor. Shenran answered solemnly. At the same time, he was delighted. Could it be that this Ancient 7 Mystic Transformations, inherited from the Azure Supreme, would allow me to use it all the way to the true Emperor realm? I suppose so. After all, the Azure Supreme was the strongest human since ancient times. In his head, the Azure Supreme was laughing. Is the extreme of cultivation a true Emperor? No, no. The realm at the end of the cultivation path is called Great Freedom. At this realm, one can transcend everything and be unrestrained. It's a pity that when I touched the threshold of the Great Freedom realm, I was already seriously injured and could only see some of the scenery in the Great Freedom realm. The cultivation technique I taught you is enough to be the key for you to step into the Great Freedom realm. I hope you can take a good look at the scenery for me. Chapter 15. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Return. Meeting Elder Luo. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios. After the last sentence, the Azure Supreme's voice no longer sounded in Shenran's mind. The surrounding palaces no longer emitted a mysterious and ancient aura. The dilapidated and lifeless city had truly been reduced to a ghost town for 10,000 years. From then on, there was not a vestige of the eternal Azure Supreme in the world. No, there are still endless legends about the Azure Supreme. And there's me, who accepted the inheritance and became his disciple. Shenran recalled what he had just experienced and felt a sense of pride surging in his chest. At this moment, I have a unique top-notch talent in the world. Now I have even accepted the inheritance of the Azure Supreme. Apart from the Azure Supreme, who had once taken half a step into the Great Freedom realm, no one else had reached that realm. If I don't reach the Great Freedom realm, it would be simply unworthy of me to possess everything that I now have. I can't stop now. Keep going. Shenran took a deep breath. At this moment, at the bottom of the Ghost Cry Cliff, the concentration of spiritual energy was more than 20 times that of the servant-disciple region. It was a perfect place for cultivation. However, it was almost dawn. Accepting the servant mission was secondary. Most importantly, Shenran felt that if he obtained the other opportunities and came here to cultivate, he would probably be able to achieve twice the results with half the effort. Hence, Shenran chose to leave the dilapidated palace and quickly left the Ghost Cry Cliff. After the Azure Supreme the Arch Inheritance disappeared, there were no more gusts of cold wind or the terrifying cries of babies in the Ghost Cry Cliff. Therefore, Shenran climbed up at an extremely fast speed. With a light tap of his toes on the cliff wall, he could successfully leap hundreds of feet up. In just a few minutes, Shenran rose 10,000 feet and arrived at the top of the Ghost Cry Cliff. Back to the 9th summit. Shenran carefully selected a servant mission that could collect opportunities again. The mission was to help a core disciple named Li Tian irrigate the spiritual field. And he was the disciple who hid the 10,000 yearwood spirit marrow in the depths of the spiritual field. Doviko, this disciple's residence was not in the same residential area as the core disciples. Instead, it was set up in an extremely remote valley on the 9th summit. When he arrived at Li Tian's residence, Li Tian, who was as fat as a ball, was lying leisurely on an armed chair, eating fruits and basking in the sun. "You're here." Li Tian opened his eyes, which were squeezed by his chubby cheeks until they were only slits. He glanced at Shenran. Then he closed his eyes again. He stretched out a pair of pudgy hands and pointed to the spiritual field behind the courtyard that was only 3 acres. At this moment, the medium-sized spiritual field was filled with various spiritual herbs that emitted a rich medicinal fragrance. Ever since Li Tian accidentally discovered this valley during his cultivation path had immediately undergone a huge change. There was no other reason. The spiritual field in his courtyard was not particularly big. However, spiritual herbs that needed 3 months to bloom only needed 3 days to bloom and 7 days to mature in his spiritual field. Moreover, the quality of mature spiritual herbs was excellent. His teacher thought that Li Tian had an extremely strong planting talent, so he took him in as his last disciple and taught him personally. In order to protect the secret of his spiritual field, Li Tian never allowed his fellow disciples to visit his residence. At the same time, the servant disciples who had already helped to water the plants were not allowed to come again. "Hello, Senior Brother Li. I'm the servant disciple who has come to water the plants today." Shen Ran respectfully turned to Li Tian. He respected the person who could provide him with opportunities from the bottom of his heart. "Yeah." Li Tian responded lazily, "Water my spiritual field well. When you leave, you can pick any 2 spiritual herbs from my field." Li Tian sounded very generous. After all, in his opinion, it took a lot of effort for others to nurture 2 spiritual herbs. For him, it was just burying the seeds in the soil and asking a few servant disciples to water them for 7 days and he would be able to harvest. "Thank you, Senior Brother Li." Shen Ran thanked him. "Then I'll leave you to it. I'm going back to the house to sleep. If there's nothing else, don't bother me." With that, Li Tian stood up from his armed chair with great difficulty. He staggered back into the room and closed the door. Before long, a deafening snore came from inside. Listening to the snoring, Shen Ran felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity. "Isn't this how old Su is when he comes back?" Shen Ran smiled and shook his head. He was not in a hurry to dig up the 10,000 wood spirit marrow in the spiritual field. Instead, he lifted a bucket of water and walked back toward the mountain. It was the 8th of January. Other than coming to retrieve the 10,000 wood spirit marrow, Shen Ran still had another opportunity to tap. That was to go to the back of the mountain to save the heavily injured 8th Summit's elder and obtain the chance to become an ordinary disciple. On the back mountain of the Empyrean Sword Sect, Luo Qifeng was lying on his back, a boulder on top of him, and despair was across his whole face. He did not expect that as an elder of the 8th peak of the Empyrean Sword Sect and an elder at the 8th level of the Illumination Realm, he would end up in such a sorry state. One night 5 days ago, when he was cultivating, he accidentally circulated the wrong cultivation technique, causing the spiritual energy to flow the wrong way in his meridians, and he went berserk. He actually lost his mind and ran around the mountain gate shouting. Finally, he ran to the remote back mountain and lay under this huge rock, unable to move. Normally, he would be able to handle a boulder. Even if an entire mountain was pressing down on him, Luo Qifeng had the ability to blast it open. However, after experiencing the cultivation mistake and going berserk, as long as Luo Qifeng circulated his spiritual energy slightly, his meridians would be in extreme pain. The terrible pain from his entire body could even knock him out. There was no other way. Without the nourishment of pills, Luo Qifeng could only quietly wait for his injured meridians to recover with time. Unexpectedly, he was weighed down by the boulder on his body for 5 days. Not only did his injured meridians not show any signs of recovery, the pain became even worse when he circulated his spiritual energy. How Luo Qifeng wished at that moment that someone would come to his rescue. However, no one had passed by this back mountain in the past 4 days. Could it be that as an elder of the first generation, his end would be that he would gradually wither away, pinned under a huge boulder? The thought saddened him. Even though Luo Qifeng had lived for more than 300 years, he was still sad. 2 lines of turbid tears slowly fell down his wrinkled cheeks. Isn't this Elder Luo? Why is he lying here? Is he cultivating? I just happened to pass by and won't disturb him anymore. Shenran's puzzled voice sounded in Luo Chifeng's ears like the winds of heaven. In fact, although Shenran said that he was just passing by, he had already walked around the back mountain for a long time before finding this place. Disciple, please wait. Luo Chifeng heard Shenran leaving. He cried out in panic. He was afraid that if he spoke too slowly, this disciple would have left. Chapter 16. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Another opportunity. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios, Elder Luo, do you have any instructions? Seeing that the fish had taken the bait, Shenran stopped in his tracks and smiled. I'm ashamed to say that I met with an accident during my cultivation. Now, I'm pressed down by a huge boulder and can't escape. I hope you can help move this huge boulder away. I'm forever grateful. The tormented Luo Chifeng couldn't care less about his status as an elder at this moment. He made a request to Shenran, who was dressed as a servant disciple. Yes, sir. That's what I was waiting for. Shenran's eyes lit up. Without a word, he lifted the huge boulder off Luo Chifeng and put it aside. The boulder that had been pressing on him for 5 days was moved away. For a moment, Luo Chifeng was almost moved to tears. Shenran had only moved the boulder out of convenience. But for Luo Chifeng, it was a lifesaver. You're very good. Luo Chifeng took out a token and handed it to Shenran. This is a token that represents my identity. From now on, you're no longer a servant disciple but an official disciple of my 8th summit. In the future, if you have any cultivation problems, feel free to look for me. My thanks to Elder Luo. Shenran was overjoyed as he took the token. He had finally discarded his servant-disciple identity and become an ordinary disciple. In the future, he would no longer need to waste time dealing with chores every day. Furthermore, he would have the right to go down the mountain at any time. He helped Luo Chifeng back to the 8th summit. Shenran did not immediately go to the disciple registration office to register his identity as an official disciple. He still had opportunities yet to obtain. After fetching water, he returned to Li Tian's residence. He was still snoring in the house. Shenran did not wake him up. He carefully irrigated the spiritual herbs in the spiritual field. After completing the mission entrusted to him by Li Tian, Shenran looked at the spiritual field filled with lush spiritual herbs and rubbed his hands excitedly. Senior Brother Li, you are the one who said that I could casually take 2 spiritual herbs from the field after completing the mission. I don't need the spiritual herbs. I'll accept the 10,000 year wood spirit marrow buried underground. With that, Shenran began to dig for the wood spirit marrow. When he first came into contact with Li Tian's spiritual field, he could feel there was an extremely rich spiritual energy churning in the soil. In addition, there were traces of cool refreshing odor floating out of the soil. It was probably the aura emitted by the wood spirit marrow underground. As Shenran dug deeper, the refreshing odor of the 10,000 year wood spirit marrow became stronger. When he reached 100 feet underground, the soil here was already dyed green. As it glowed green, a refreshing fragrance wafted from the soil to his nose. Just by smelling this fragrance, Shenran immediately felt lively and alert. Even the spiritual energy in his body circulated faster. That made him speed up the excavation. When Shenran dug 1,000 feet underground, he finally found the object which was the main purpose of his trip. 10,000 year wood spirit marrow. The 10,000 year wood spirit marrow in the shape of a baby was crystal clear and suffused with a gentle green light. Just looking at it made him feel calm, and the restlessness in his heart disappeared. Stars of green starlight were peeling off from the 10,000 year wood spirit marrow and fusing into the surrounding soil, providing the land that buries it with power beyond measure. Shenran estimated that Li Tian's spiritual field had been flooded by the power of the 10,000 year wood spirit marrow for so long. Even if he took it away now, the magical power of the spiritual field could last for 100 years. Just as Shenran was about to keep it, something unexpected happened. His outstretched hand had just touched the 10,000. Year with spirit marrow. The baby like 10,000. Year with spirit marrow suddenly opened its eyes and glared at Shenran angrily. It seemed to be blaming Shenran for disturbing its slumber. After 10,000 years of growth, this thing actually had intelligence. A bone-chilling coldness instantly spread throughout Shenran's body, making him unable to move for a moment. The 10,000. Year with spirit marrow also took this opportunity to shake the short limbs on its small torso and try to escape. Faced with such a huge opportunity, Shenran would not sit back and do nothing. Let me suppress it. In an instant, 10,000 golden rays flickered in his eyes. Endless chains condensed out of thin air and instantly bound the 10,000. Year with spirit marrow that was about to escape. At the same time, the majestic aura of the supreme bone and the primordial aura of the Pangu's sacred body erupted. It enveloped the 10,000. Year with spirit marrow that was still struggling. Sensing the supreme aura of the three great talents targeting him, the 10,000. Year with spirit marrow revealed an aggrieved expression. Only then did he give up struggling and transform into a green light that fused into Shenran's body. What are you doing? What are you doing? You can cause such a huge commotion just by watering me. Don't ruin my spiritual field, or I won't let you off. Inside the house, Li Tian, who was sleeping, felt a trace of Shenran's aura and suddenly woke up. Full of anger, he pushed open the door and hurried out. This magical spirit field was his most beloved. No one was allowed to touch it. Senior brother Li, you're awake. I've watered your spiritual field. I won't pluck the spiritual herbs. If there's nothing else, I'll take my leave. Shenran, who had just restored the spiritual field to its original state, turned around and smiled at Li Tian. Was that just my imagination? Li Tian scratched his head suspiciously. He looked at the safe and sound spiritual field and then at Shenran's bright smile. He immediately felt that something was wrong. His heart felt empty, as if he had lost something very important. However, looking at the dense spiritual herbs in his spiritual field, he did not know what to say. He felt irritated. Is it because I haven't had enough sleep? In the end, Li Tian gave up and waved his hand. He turned back into the house and said to Shenran, "It's been hard on you." "Yes, I won't disturb senior brother's rest." Shenran looked inside his body. He glanced at the 10,000. Year with spirit marrow floating in his divine sea. Perfectly content, he left Li Tian's residence. Back at the servant-disciple area. Old Su was snoring soundly. Even when Shenran came to his side, he was not in the least awake. This is a person who was born ordinary. If there are no accidents, he will spend an ordinary and fulfilling life in the Empyrean Sword sect. Looks like you like your current life very much, Old Su. I won't disturb you anymore. If you need any help in the future, feel free to look for me. After reading Old Su's narrative, Shenran left a farewell letter for him. At the same time, he placed dozens of spirit stones he had accumulated, on top of the letter. Finally, after taking a look at the bed that Old Su had repaired for him, Shenran gently closed the door. He left the servant-disciple area. Shenran brought the token that Luo Qifeng had given him to the 8th Summit's disciple registration office. He looked at his name, which was recorded on the list of official disciples of the 8th Summit, and collected the green robe and token that represented his identity as an ordinary disciple. Shenran was surprisingly calm about becoming an ordinary disciple again. His pursuit was no longer constrained to this. With the status of an ordinary disciple, he could leave the mountain at will. Shenran hastened on through the night and finally arrived at Qingshan town, thousands of miles away. Over here, there was one last opportunity waiting for him. Chapter 17. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Upgrade. Blessing of the Fortune God. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios. Compared to the huge Empyrean sword sect more than 3,000 miles away, Qingshan town was just an inconspicuous small town. The sun was rising, bathing the land in its rays. A beggar covered in frostbite sat at the gate of the dilapidated temple. His clothes were tattered and his entire body emitted a sour smell. He scratched his hair that had not been washed for a long period of time. He looked worse than any other beggar. However, if anyone could get close enough to look closely into his eyes, they would find a sense of authority that encompassed everything. The beggar was not as simple as he looked. He was Murong Xian, the deputy mountain lord of the Taichu Mountain, one of the top 10 sects in the entire fantasy continent. His cultivation had long reached the terrifying true emperor realm. It could be said that in this fantasy world, Murong Xian was ranked at the top in terms of status and strength. However, with such terrifying strength and noble status, he had an unknown quirk. When he was young, he came from a poor family. On the path of cultivation, he had obtained the help of a benefactor which led him to his current achievements. Therefore, in his free time, Murong Xian would disguise as a beggar covered in sores, and roam around in an inconspicuous town. If someone helped him sincerely, even though he had transformed into a beggar, he would give that person a supreme opportunity. "Please, kind sir, give me something to eat. I haven't eaten for days." Murong Xian hugged the legs of a passerby and pretended to beg. "Get lost. Stinky beggar, if you want to die, get lost. Don't infect me with your rotten sores." A passerby kicked him away and cursed. After being kicked by a mortal, Murong Xian was neither sad nor happy. However, he thought to himself, "This person has no opportunity." Finding good people and giving them opportunities gave Murong Xian joy. It was one of his joys to transform into a beggar at the bottom of the hierarchy and experience the coldness and warmth of the world. At this moment, the fragrance of steamed buns wafted into Murong Xian's nose. "Eat this." Looking up, he saw Shenran's eyes filled with pity. "Your sores look so bad. If you don't treat them soon, I'm afraid you won't survive the coming winter." Murong Xian took the steamed bun. Shenran took out a few coins and handed them to him. "Take this money to buy some medicine." "Thank you, kind master." Murong Xian grabbed the steamed buns and coins and thanked Shenran feelingly. Shenran shook his head gently and turned to leave. At the same time, he sighed. It's not easy to survive in this world. Shenran was also lamenting in his heart, could it be that it's not the 9th day of the first lunar month today? Did I remember the wrong day? This is already the 11th beggar I saved. Why haven't I met the person in the narrative who can give me an opportunity after the good deed? Young man, please wait. At that moment, the river of time seemed to stop flowing. All the sounds in the world disappeared. The wind stopped. On the road, passers-by stopped in mid-step. An extremely dignified voice sounded behind Shenran. "Here we go." Shenran suppressed his excitement and slowly turned around. The beggar who was sitting on the ground with rotten sores all over his body had disappeared. In its place was a tall figure covered in resplendent colors. Just by standing there, he was illuminated by divine light and surrounded by various phenomena like fairies reciting poems. That person's expression was calm, but he had a dignified aura. "I'm nowhere near him now." As soon as his gaze rested on this person, this thought appeared in Shenran's mind. He had obtained all kinds of talents and the Azure Supreme the Arch Inheritance. He felt his narrative becoming real. "I am the heavenly venerate, immeasurable fortune." Murong Xian spoke slowly, his voice as loud as the 9 heavens. His words suddenly sounded in his ears. Shenran felt enlightened and hurriedly bowed respectfully. "Greetings, true emperor. I'm Shenran." He's actually a true Emperor realm expert. Murong Xian's short words stirred up a storm in Shenran's heart. One had to know that other than the Azure Supreme who had once reached the half-step Great Freedom Realm, the true Emperor realm was the peak of all cultivators. Every true Emperor realm expert was the top of the world. Shenran must not be in the least bit careless in his attitude. Seeing that Shenran was so humble, Murong Xian nodded slightly. Shenran, I see that you are kind-hearted and are willing to help the weak. You have the heart of a pure child and are a person fated with me. I will give you the blessing of the God of Blessing, allowing your cultivation speed to increase by 3 times and help you rise in your cultivation path. I hope that you will not lose your pure heart in the future and be a kind person. As he spoke, Murong Xian had already reached out and gently stroked Shenran's head. He muttered, "Fortune as a guide, fortune descends from the sky. Blessings of the God of Blessing." Buzz. Shenran immediately felt an extremely warm power flowing into his body through Murong Xian's palm. In his body, the supreme bones, Panga's sacred body, ancient immortal eyes, and heavenly spirit root became active at the same time, fighting to absorb the warm current. Shenran could feel that his cultivation talent was evolving crazily. Is this the blessing from the God of Blessing? Shenran sighed inwardly. Not long after, all his top-notch talents were 50% stronger than before. This meant that Shenran's future breakthrough speed could increase by 50%. Thinking of how the true Emperor had said that he could increase his cultivation speed by 3 times, Shenran was extremely excited. At that moment, the warmth that had poured into his body disappeared. Didn't you say that you would increase my cultivation speed by 3 times? Why did the warm current disappear after only increasing it by 50%? Shenran was dumbfounded and looked at Murong Xian blankly. The true Emperor can also lie. He did not know that Murong Xian was equally embarrassed. The so-called blessing of the God was Murong Xian stimulating Shenran's potential by injecting his spiritual energy into his body. The moment he touched Shenran's head, he realized that the former had an extremely terrifying cultivation talent. The stronger the cultivation talent, the more spiritual energy it would consume to stimulate their potential. When he injected spiritual energy into Shenran just now, Murong Xian had already injected 1/3 of his cultivation into him. Unexpectedly, he had underestimated Shenran's talent and only increased his cultivation speed by 50%. Facing Shenran's puzzled gaze, Murong Xian blushed and poured almost all the spiritual energy in his body into Shenran. Warmth filled his head again. Shenran's cultivation talent continued to increase. 70%. 80%. Double. Then the warmth inside him vanished again. My cultivation speed still hasn't increased by 3 times. It has only increased by 2 times. Shenran looked up blankly and realized that Murong Xian was no longer in front of him. At this moment, Murong Xian had already moved thousands of miles away with the spiritual energy he had just left for himself. It's too embarrassing. It's too embarrassing. If I had known that this kid's cultivation talent was so terrifying, I wouldn't have said that I could increase his cultivation speed by 3 times. I didn't expect that I had to use almost all the spiritual energy in my body to barely double his cultivation speed. I hope he doesn't remember my name. Otherwise, how awkward would it be when I see him in the future? Chapter 18. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The Furious Wang Qingxian. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios TSK, he actually disappeared. Forget it, even if it only doubled my cultivation speed, this trip was not a waste of time. Shenran felt that his cultivation talent was twice as active as before and was quite satisfied. Although this blessing of the God of Blessing only doubled his cultivation speed, it seemed to be much slower than the blood cloud powder that increased his cultivation speed by 10 times and the top-grade spirit gathering pill by 20 times. However, the increase in cultivation speed brought by the medicinal pill only lasted for a short period of time. And this doubling of speed was permanent. In the long run, the permanent double cultivation speed would increase, and the benefits would be much higher than those pills. Alright, now that I've obtained the Azure Supreme, the Arch Inheritance, the 10,000. Year with Spirit Marrow, and the blessing of the God of Blessing, it's time to turn these opportunities into my strength. You said that Shenran took the token of the 8th Summit's elder and registered with the Disciples' Office to become an official disciple of the 8th Summit. When Wan Xiling heard this news from her daughter, she was instantly overjoyed. Over the past few days, she had been helping Wang Qingxian in his fans. He might be hostile to the 9th Summit because of Shenran's existence. At this moment, the heaviness in her heart was finally relieved after Shenran's departure. On the other side, Wan Qingqing looked a little disappointed. Mom, if you hadn't demoted him to a servant disciple back then, he wouldn't have become the 8th Summit's disciple competing with my 9th Summit. The Empyrean Sword sect had a total of 9 peaks. Among them, the first main peak was a forbidden area of the sect. Even the sect master could not easily step foot on it. No one knew who lived on the first main peak of the Empyrean Sword sect. The second and third main peaks were where the sect master, all the higher-ups of the sect, and the 3 Dao seeds lived. As for the 4th and 5th peaks, they belonged to the core disciples who were valued by the sect and were personally guided by the higher-ups of the sect. The remaining 6th to 9th peaks were controlled by 4 peak masters. They were used to nurture ordinary disciples with ordinary talent. In addition, the 6th to 9th peaks were competing with each other. After all, they were only nurturing ordinary disciples. The latter 4 peaks naturally would not receive too much resources from the sect. All the cultivation resources given by the sect had to be fought for by them. Therefore, the 6th to 9th peaks held a tournament every quarter. At that time, the last 4 peaks would send out their strongest disciples to compete. Through their results in the competition, they would decide the distribution of cultivation resources for the next quarter. Shenran joining the 8th Summit meant that although they would still be fellow disciples of the Empyrean Sword sect in the future, he would be competing against the 9th Summit where Wan Qingqing was. Thinking about how her good friend was about to become a competitor, Wang Qingqing felt very upset. Silly girl. Seeing that her daughter was depressed about this matter, Wan Xiling couldn't help but comfort her. On the day everyone steps onto the path of cultivation, they will have the guidance of the Great Tao. Everything is predetermined. I think that Shenran being demoted to a servant disciple and becoming a disciple of the 8th Summit by chance is the guidance of fate. But weren't you the one who decided to demote him back then? Wang Qingqing looked at her mother angrily. In the past, Wan Xiling would definitely be angry if Wan Qingqing talked back to her. However, when she found out today that Shenran, the jinx who had offended Wang Qingxian, had already left the 9th peak that she controlled, she could not help but be in a good mood. Hence, she did not argue with Wan Qingqing. Instead, she said pleasantly, "Don't you understand? Shenran's promotion to an ordinary disciple of the 8th Summit is predestined by the heavens. It's naturally predestined for him to be demoted by me. It just so happened that he has become a disciple of the 8th Summit this time and has nothing to do with our 9th Summit anymore. As the first disciple of the 9th Summit, it's not appropriate for you to come into contact with him again. In the future, stop talking about him and cultivate well." Mother, Wan Qingqing felt a little wronged. Predestined, it's all predestined. When Wan Xiling thought of how the 9th Summit would be rid of the implications that Shenran might bring about in the future, she was overjoyed and kept repeating this sentence. "Your Highness, Lord Zhou has replied to your request for more blood cloud powder." On the second main peak, Wang Qingxuan's subordinates were kneeling in front of him and reporting. What did Lord Zhou say? Wang Qingxian, who was at first slumped in his seat, instantly perked up. He sat up straight and looked at his men expectantly. Previously, he had relied on the blood cloud powder to break through to the first level of the illumination realm in less than 3 years. He was known as a peerless genius. Wang Qingxian was already used to the feeling of rapid improvement after consuming the blood cloud powder. During this period of time, because he did not have the help of the blood cloud powder, half a month had passed, and his realm was still stuck in his original place, making no progress. Now, the snail-like speed of improvement made him extremely frustrated. Left with no choice, Wang Qingxian could only take the risk of being accused of incompetence and report to the demon sect that the blood cloud powder had been snatched away. At the same time, he made an application. In order to obtain the position of the Empyrean Sword Sect's Daozi as soon as possible, he hoped that the demon sect could provide more blood cloud powder for cultivation. Lord Zhou said. The subordinate in charge of reporting the situation seemed a little hesitant. He stammered for a long time, not knowing how to speak. Seeing the other party's attitude, Wang Qingxian immediately had a bad feeling. However, he was still unwilling to give up on his last hope. He asked, "What did Lord Zhou say?" "Stop stalling and tell me." "Yes, Your Highness Dao Seed." Wang Qingxuan's subordinate pursed his lips and felt rather conflicted. He knew the temper of the Dao Seed in front of him. Although he was only a subordinate responsible for delivering news, it would be unfortunate if he had to deliver bad news personally. In his anger, Wang Qingxian might injure him severely. However, looking at Wang Qingxuan's ferocious expression, he was afraid that he would also suffer if he didn't say anything. Left with no choice, the person kneeling on the ground quickly said, "Lord Zhou said that Your Highness Dao Seed has already consumed too much blood cloud powder previously, but there has been no progress in the fight for the position of the Empyrean Sword Sect's Dao Child. This time, it was even worse. You actually let an outsider snatch the blood cloud powder. Crime added to crime. Lord Zhou has decided to stop your supply of blood cloud powder for half a year as a punishment." "What?" As expected, after hearing this answer, Wang Qingxian immediately fell into a state of anger. Endless power spread out from his body, turning all the expensive furniture around him into dust. "Are you sure you didn't lie?" Wang Qingxian instantly teleported to the front of that subordinate and lifted his collar. His eyes were red like two volcanoes that could erupt at any moment. "Your Highness Dao Seed, calm down," the subordinate clearly panicked and stammered. "Lord Zhou also said that if your identity is exposed or if you don't succeed in taking the position of the Empyrean Sword Sect's Dao Child, your clansmen will be implicated." "What?" Wang Qingxuan's roar soared into the sky, and the space within a 10-mile radius trembled. Boom! 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 A moment later, Wang Qingxian vented his anger on the subordinate who reported the situation in the house he lived in. They were all smashed to pieces. Then Wang Qingxian gathered all his other subordinates and instructed them through gritted teeth. "Find him. Dig 3 feet into the ground and find the person who stole my blood cloud powder. I want to tear him into pieces." Chapter 19. You are listening at novelfull.audio. God bless the Empyrean Sword Sect. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios. Phew, Shenran exhaled softly, his eyes flickering. At this moment, he had already returned to the bottom of the Ghost Cry Cliff, and stood in front of the palace left behind by the Azure Supreme. He had obtained the ancient 7 mystic transformations, the 10,000-year-wood spirit marrow, and the blessing of the God of blessing that permanently doubled his cultivation speed. It's time to cultivate. Compared to the outside world, the spiritual energy here was 20 times richer. It was also a secret place far away from the 9 peaks of the Empyrean Sword Sect. It was a good place to cultivate. I wonder how far I can break through this time with the help of the 3 great opportunities. With anticipation, Shenran sat down cross-legged. He began to circulate the ancient 7 mystic transformations according to the inherited memories. At the same time, he guided the endless golden liquid spiritual energy in his divine sea to slowly wrap around the 10,000-year-wood spirit marrow floating above his divine sea, wanting to absorb it. Boom! As soon as the ancient 7 mystic transformations began to circulate, Shenran transformed into a human-shaped black hole and erupted with an unimaginable suction force, attracting a vast amount of dense spiritual energy. Its body devoured the dense spiritual energy like a whale swallowing water. Half of the huge amount of spiritual energy was absorbed by the Panga's sacred body, the ancient immortal eyes, and the supreme bones. The other half was infinitely compressed and purified by the heavenly spirit root and charged into the divine sea. The 10,000 wood spirit marrow in his body also began to quickly dissolve into wood spirit chi that was filled with vitality and had the ability to heal all pain. Threads of it fused into Shenran's bones, muscles, skin, and internal organs. His cultivation realm was breaking through. As time passed, Shenran's body was also undergoing a terrifying change. Under the endless spiritual energy from the outside world and the wood spiritual power from his body, the space around Shenran began to distort. The 300 supreme bones in his body emitted endless dazzling light. Countless golden runes seeped out of his body, and each rune was filled with the aura of a king that could make the heavens tremble. Under the cleansing of the heaven and earth spiritual energy and wood spirit chi, the supreme bones began to release more potential. The golden runes branded on Shenran's bones became even more complicated and gorgeous for a moment. It was as if the heavens were holding a brush, making them even more complete. In addition, the Panga's sacred body had also begun to evolve. The already tough muscle membrane became even more crystalline. He exuded an ancient and powerful aura. Shenran, who was in a cultivation state, suddenly raised his head and opened his eyes. His eyes turned into double pupils. A golden light shot into the sky and turned into chaotic chains, trying to lock the heavens. Boom! 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 The void shook continuously. In an instant, thunder rumbled in the 9 heavens. Countless resplendent golden lights pierced through the clouds, crossed the canyon, and shot over. It was as if endless immortal light was tilted, and rainbow-colored gliding clouds surged endlessly. Golden lotuses surged from the ground, and a rare fragrance spread for thousands of miles. The sky was auspicious, and endless power rolled out. All the ancient ferocious beasts in the grand myriad mountains knelt on the ground and kowtowed in the direction of the Ghost Cry Cliff. A grand and vast phenomenon enveloped an area of 100 miles, including the Grand Myriad Mountains and the Empyrean Sword Sect. The entire sky became colorful, and all the stars bloomed with all their glory. The stars appeared high in the sky, together with the blazing sun, as if they were cheering for the birth of a great existence. What is this situation? Why did such a dazzling phenomenon suddenly appear? Could it be that an ancestor broke through and received the congratulations of heaven and earth? This phenomenon is too terrifying. Before today, I'd only heard of such a phenomenon in books. To be able to see it with my own eyes today is even more shocking than the legends. Who on earth triggered such a terrifying phenomenon? For a moment, countless discussions about the phenomenon caused by Shenran erupted in the Empyrean Sword Sect. Ha ha ha. At the peak of the first main peak of the Empyrean Sword Sect. An extremely hearty laugh sounded in everyone's ears like a thunderclap. An old, thin, but imposing figure flew into the sky and stood in the air. That's the founder of the Empyrean Sword Sect, the great ancestor who hasn't come out of seclusion for 3,000 years. The others looked at the figure in the sky and were shocked. As the sect master of the Empyrean Sword Sect, Ouyang Tianming recognized that figure. The 13th sect master of the Empyrean Sword Sect, Ouyang Tianming, greets great ancestor. The strongest person in the history of the Empyrean Sword Sect had even appeared. Without hesitation, Ouyang Tianming leaped into the air and knelt before the laughing figure. What? That terrifying figure is actually the founder of our Empyrean Sword Sect. It's said that before he went into seclusion, he was one of the strongest people in this world. Our Empyrean Sword Sect was also one of the top forces at that time because of his existence. It's just that this patriarch went into seclusion for some reason. That's why the Empyrean sword sect slowly declined. Did he break through some kind of shackles by appearing here today? Was he the one who attracted this phenomenon? Everyone from the Empyrean sword sect followed Ouyang Tianming and knelt down to the figure in the sky. At the same time, they secretly guessed whether the phenomenon was related to this great ancestor. God bless the Empyrean sword sect. God bless the Empyrean sword sect. Ha ha ha. The Empyrean sword sect's great ancestor, who was the old man who had been paying attention to Shenran, shouted to the Ghost Cry Cliff where Shenran was cultivating. This young prodigy from the Empyrean sword sect had really given him too many delightful surprises. He did not expect that a divine sea realm cultivator could actually cause such a phenomenon. If he could mature without a hitch in the future, the Empyrean sword sect would definitely be able to regain its former glory through him. However, Shenran's phenomenon was too dazzling at this moment. It wouldn't matter if the only people who knew of his existence were from the Empyrean sword sect. However, such a shocking phenomenon would definitely attract the attention of the other sections. In order to protect Shenran, who had yet to mature, the founder of the Empyrean sword sect flew into the sky and attracted all the attention. Hearing the great ancestor's words, everyone in the Empyrean sword sect thought that their previous guesses were right. They thought that the terrifying phenomenon in the sky happened because the great ancestor had broken through some kind of shackles, causing the heavens and earth to congratulate him. God bless the Empyrean sword sect. Congratulations to the founder. Congratulations to the Empyrean sword sect. Thinking of this, sect master Ouyang Tianming was extremely excited and immediately gave his blessings. God bless the Empyrean sword sect. Congratulations to the founder. Congratulations to the Empyrean sword sect. Everyone else in the Empyrean sword sect congratulated him in unison. Everyone from the Empyrean sword sect was extremely excited at this moment. The Empyrean sword sect was going to rise and recreate its former glory. At the same time, at the Ghost Cry Cliff, Shenran, who was unaware of all this, was also rising rapidly. Chapter 20. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Breakthrough. Modify the narrative. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios 4th level of the Divine Sea Realm. 5th level of the Divine Sea Realm. 6th level of the Divine Sea Realm. To others, bottlenecks that were as difficult to overcome as mountains did not exist for Shenran. He broke through them one after another. The bones and muscles in his body emitted a thunderous sound. His extremely top-notch talents had also been elevated to different degrees. After exiting his cultivation state, Shenran let out a long white breath. Just a single breath carried terrifying power. In this vast Ghost Cry Cliff, a hurricane that swept through the 9 heavens was formed. Countless boulders weighing tens of thousands of caddies were blown out of the canyon by this breath. Boom! Shenran opened his eyes and clenched his fists. The air in his palm was directly crushed, forming a thunderous explosion. He stood up and stamped his foot gently. An abysmal crack that was tens of thousands of feet long spread out. At this moment, Shenran's Pangu sacred body had already ascended to the highest. Just his physical strength alone easily surpassed 1,000,000 caddies. The growth of his supreme bones, ancient immortal eyes, and heavenly spirit root could not be underestimated. Although his cultivation level had only increased from the 3rd level of the Divine Sea Realm to the 6th level of the Divine Sea Realm. However, Shenran's strength had actually increased by more than 100 times. In addition, after absorbing the entire 10,000. Year wood spirit marrow, apart from the Pangu's sacred body, Shenran also had an additional physique, the wood spirit body. This was a magical physique that was not inferior to the Pangu sacred body at all. It possessed unlimited self-healing ability. Legend had it that when the wood spirit body was developed to its ultimate, it could even be reborn with a drop of blood. Shenran's expression turned serious. He used all his strength and cut a foot-long wound on his arm. The moment the wound appeared, the wood spiritual power in his body surged crazily towards the wound. In the blink of an eye, the foot-long wound on his arm was healed by the surging wood spiritual power before it could even bleed. Looking at it with the naked eye, one could not even see the scars on Shenran's arm. I will be one step closer to the final realm of transcendence and freedom. Feeling the increase in his strength, Shenran was overjoyed. Of course, after he cultivated, there was also something that did not seem so wonderful. Shenran looked around the entire Ghost Cry cliff and felt helpless. The extremely dense spiritual energy at the bottom of the cliff had disappeared. The remaining spiritual energy was not even 1% of the previous servant-disciple region. My talent is too strong. Every time I break through, the resources I need are also terrifying. Shenran held his forehead and sighed. I have to find more opportunities as soon as possible, Shenran thought to himself. Also, after becoming an ordinary disciple, I can have a free opportunity to go to the treasure pavilion to choose weapons. I can't miss it. Shenran took a look. After he broke through to the Divine Sea realm, the opportunity to modify narratives was refreshed, and he could do it 3 times again. He could have acquired the weapon by modifying the narrative. However, the opportunity to modify the narrative would only refresh every time he broke through a major realm. It was really precious. He might as well check out the treasure pavilion first. By checking the narrative, there might be unexpected gains. If he really couldn't find a suitable weapon, he could use the narrative to modify it. He was lost in thought. Then Shenran exerted strength in his feet and easily jumped onto the Ghost Cry cliff that was thousands of feet high. He rushed in the direction of the Empyrean Sword Sect. Soon he returned to the 8th peak of the Empyrean Sword Sect. Soon Shenran sensed that something was weird. He was happy because he had just broken through and his strength had soared. However, he realized that other than himself, all the disciples of the Empyrean Sword Sect he saw on the way back to the Empyrean Sword Sect also had expressions of joy on their faces. In addition, when he arrived at the mountain gate, he discovered that the mountain gate, which was usually only frequented by disciples of the sect, was actually filled with people from all walks of life. They cried and shouted, begging the Empyrean Sword Sect to give them a chance to become servant disciples. He wondered if something major had happened in the sect during the time he left the sect to obtain opportunities and cultivate. But after all, it had nothing to do with him. What Shenran needed to do was to fight for more opportunities and reach the peak of cultivation as soon as possible. All other miscellaneous matters would distract him. Elder, I'm Shenran, a new disciple of the 8th Summit. I'm here to choose a weapon. In front of the treasure pavilion, Shenran bowed respectfully to the old man in front of him. All the weapons of the Empyrean Sword Sect were kept in the treasure pavilion. From mortal iron weapons to supreme ancient divine weapons, they were all recorded. As for the old man in front of him, as an elder guarding such an important place like the treasure pavilion, his strength must be unfathomable. Shenran silently sensed for a moment and realized that the other party's strength far exceeded his own. He could not figure out his strength at all. Out of curiosity, Shenran secretly glanced at the other party's narrative. This is an Emperor Realm cultivator who has lived for more than 4,000 years. He is one of the founders of the Empyrean Sword Sect. After his potential was exhausted and it was difficult for him to improve, he gave up pursuing fame and fortune and became the gatekeeper of the treasure pavilion, quietly waiting for death. After reading the narrative, Shenran gasped. He had never expected that the elder guarding the gate of the treasure pavilion was actually an emperor-level expert who had lived for 4,000 years and was only inferior to the true emperor realm. It could only be said that the thoughts of these old monsters who had lived for a long time were really unpredictable. You're Shenran. The old man opened his eyes and glanced at Shenran. After registering as an ordinary disciple, I saw that you didn't come for 2 days. I thought you didn't want the weapons that were provided for free. I was delayed by some miscellaneous matters a few days ago. I only had time today, Shenran said respectfully. Yes, go in. The old man waved his hand and the door to the treasure room opened automatically behind him. Remember, you can only choose from the first floor. Once you go to the second floor or above, you will bear the consequences. In addition, once you choose a weapon, this opportunity will be invalid. If you want to change weapons, you have to pay at least 30,000 spirit stones to enter the treasure pavilion again. Thank you for your guidance, Elder. Shenran bowed to the old man again before walking into the treasure pavilion. Because it was the treasure vault of the Empyrean sword sect, most of the weapons in it were swords. Shenran chose especially carefully. He carefully studied the narrative of every weapon he saw. This is an ordinary sword. Nothing out of the ordinary. This is a sword with fire attributes. It's of average quality. This is a sword with a curse attribute. Those who are slashed by it will be contaminated. It is of average quality. This is an ordinary sword. After looking at almost all the weapons on the first floor, Shenran shook his head. None of the weapons on this floor were of quality that would satisfy him. It was said that the higher the floor of the treasure pavilion, the better the quality of the weapons collected. Presumably, only average quality weapons would be stored on this floor. Shenran was about to leave the treasure pavilion with that random sword and use the narrative modification to upgrade. A pile of hundreds of battered weapons caught his eye. To be precise, it was the narrative of a sword wrapped in heavy rust that made Shenran's eyes light up. This was a weapon used by a human powerhouse, an emperor, 20,000 years ago.